I had stopped at the King's Head for my Thursday evening pint of small beer with John Reeve, as I had done every Thursday for 10 years, when I overheard from the other side of the wooden parlor screen John apologizing, quietly, in the careful, embarrassed way of a kind man, to a young woman about a fourth night's lodging she could not afford. I will tell you the whole of it, because the title deed in my study drawer is dated the 4th of October, and the receipt for a banker's draft is folded inside it, and because the woman I married the following June still keeps, in a small lacquered box on her writing table, a silver thimble and a small gold mourning brooch that were paid across that very bar for her first 2 nights. My name does not matter to this. People in the county call me the quiet Duke of Brightwell Park, and they have called me that since my father died and left me the house at 26. I am 41 now. The estate sits 6 miles north of the King's Head on the Great North Road, and once a week, every Thursday, weather permitting, since the autumn after my father was buried, I have ridden down to the inn and sat with John Reeve for an hour over a single glass. John was my father's friend before he was mine. His wife Margaret, who had been my mother's milliner in her girlhood, died of the influenza the spring I came home from Oxford, and John has kept the inn alone since. Thursday evenings were, I think, as much for him as for me. We did not speak a great deal. We did not need to. On the evening I am describing, the 3rd of October, a Thursday, the wind already turning, I came into the parlor and found my usual settle behind the dark oak screen empty, as John always kept it. John was at the bar in the next room. I could hear him through the screen, and I could hear, too, a young woman's voice, low, courteous, very tired. "I am sorry, Mr. Reeve," she was saying. "I have nothing else. I had thought to walk on at first light tomorrow." "Walk on where, my dear?" John said very gently. "To Yorkshire. My cousin Mrs. Margaret Halsted at Thirsk is expecting me. She has agreed to receive me." There was a small pause. "She is the last of my family I have not yet inconvenienced." "From here to Thirsk on foot is 60 miles in October," John said. "I cannot let you walk it." "You have already done more for me than was prudent of you," she said. "I have not paid you for tonight either. You will please consider the thimble and the brooch as the whole of my account, and I will write to you when I am settled and send what remains." "My dear young lady." "Mr. Reeve, please." Her voice was even, the way a person's voice is even when she is holding herself very steady against something. "It has been 3 nights of your kindness, and I would not impose a 4th. I will go at dawn. I shall not need breakfast." I sat down on the settle very slowly. I did not put down my hat. I listened for 10 minutes, perhaps a little more, and in that time I learned, between her sentences and John's, the shape of how she had come to be standing at his bar with nothing. Her name was Esme Hollister. She was 23. Her parents had died of fever within the same fortnight when she was 14, and she had been taken in by her father's elder sister, a Miss Charlotte Hollister of Lincolnshire, with whom she had lived for 9 years. Miss Hollister had been a maiden lady of small means, a great reader, and by every word her niece said of her, a quiet, scrupulous, devoted woman. She had died on the 12th of September, of a slow autumn fever, with Esme reading aloud to her from Cowper at the bedside. The Lincolnshire cottage had been a lifehold. It reverted at her death to its owner. There was a distant cousin in Thirsk, a Mrs. Halsted, who had written by return of post that she would receive Esme as a companion if she could make her way north. Esme had set out by mail coach on the morning of the 30th of September, with her aunt's old leather traveling case, the small gold mourning brooch pinned at her collar, and the sum of her aunt's last quarterly annuity sewn into the lining of her pelisse. 3 miles south of the village of Loughside, at dusk on the 1st of October, the front near side axle of the mail coach had broken, and the carriage had gone over into the ditch. No one had been seriously hurt. In the confusion of climbing out, a lantern set down on the bank, a coachman shouting for the guard, the passengers helping each other up, a fellow inside passenger, a soft-spoken gentleman in a brown coat who had introduced himself at Stamford as Mr. Pember, had unpicked the lining of her pelisse and taken the whole of her quarterly allowance. The village constable would catch him at Doncaster a week later. On the description John would later give, the money was already gone. Pember was a known card-sharp working the Northern Road. I record this here because a small justice was done, and Esme deserved to know it. She had walked the 3 miles to the King's Head in the dark, with the small leather case in one hand. She arrived at 8:30 on the evening of the 1st of October. She had no money, no recommendation, and no notion of anyone north of Lincolnshire she might call upon for credit. She showed John her aunt's last letter to Mrs. Halsted at Thirsk. She offered him the silver thimble out of her sewing case, which had been her mother's, for the first night. John, who had taken one look at her plain grey pelisse and her quiet manner and her composure, gave her a small upstairs room over the stable-yard and accepted the thimble as a formality, and went and put it in the drawer beneath the bar where he kept his own wife's old wedding ring. The second night she had given him the small gold mourning brooch off her collar, the last good thing, she said, her aunt had left her. John had taken that too, and put it in the drawer with the thimble, and had not told her that he intended to return both as soon as she would let him. The third night, that Thursday, the night I sat behind the screen with my hat still on, she had nothing left to offer at all, and she had told him in that even, courteous voice that she would walk on at dawn. John was a man who did not raise his voice. He said now very quietly, "Will you sit down a moment in the parlor, Miss Hollister, while I think what is best to be done? There is a small fire. I will bring you a cup of tea." I heard her say, "You are very kind." I heard a chair pulled out on the other side of the screen, perhaps 4 feet from where I was sitting. I heard her sit down. I heard her take a long, careful breath, the breath of a person who has been holding herself upright for 3 days and would, in a moment alone, allow herself to be tired. I rose without making a sound and walked round the screen to the bar. John looked up. "Your Grace, I did not know you were." "I know," I said. "I sat down before you came in. John, I would like to ask you a question, and I would like you to answer it honestly." "Of course. Have you ever thought of selling me the inn?" John blinked. He was 63. He had been at the King's Head since he was 19. He set down the cloth he was holding. "I have thought of it now and then, Your Grace. The roof wants doing. My back is not what it was. There is no one to leave it to. I had thought, perhaps in another year or two, of writing to you. Would £500 and a life annuity of £40 a year, with the management of the house left in your hands as long as you wish it, be a fair offer?" He was a long time answering. He was not, I think, calculating. I think he was understanding what I was doing and why, and being careful not to allow himself to show it. "It would be a generous offer, Your Grace." "Then will you take it?" "I will take it." I took out my pocketbook and a pen, and on a half-sheet of in-paper I wrote a banker's draft on my own bank at Lincoln for £500 in John Reeves' name, dated the 4th of October, the morning. I wrote beneath it a memorandum of the annuity and the management, signed it, and asked John to countersign it as a record of his acceptance, which he did. I told him I would have my man of business draw up the formal conveyance and bring it to him on Monday for his signature, and that I should like the purchase to be effective from that morning, the 4th of October, for the sake of one small matter. Then I asked him to put the silver thimble and the small gold mourning brooch in an envelope and give them to me. He did. I told him also that the young lady's bill for the 3 nights past, and for as many nights more as she should choose, was to be paid in full out of the cash drawer that evening, and that the cash drawer would be made up from my own pocketbook before I left. He said, "Your Grace, may I ask?" "You may," I said. "I overheard her, John. I listened 10 minutes. I have no acquaintance with her. I do not propose to make one tonight. I propose to remove her difficulty, which is small, and leave her her dignity, which is not. In the morning you will tell her that her bill has been paid in full, and that the inn has been purchased overnight by the Duke of Brightwell, who is asking her to consider herself a guest of his estate for as long as she chooses to remain on her own terms, with no obligation of any kind. You will tell her that he will not call upon her unless she invites him to. You will give her the envelope from me which contains her thimble and her brooch and a short note. Will you do that?" John looked at me a moment. He said, "I will do that." "Thank you," I said. "I shall not stay for my pint tonight. Give her my settle by the fire if she will sit there. The wind is going to come round before midnight." I wrote out the short note for the envelope, sitting at the end of the bar, 3 lines and my signature, and put the thimble and the brooch inside with it and sealed it. The note said this: "Madam, these were given in payment for the kindness of an honest man and are now returned to you because the account has been settled by another hand. Please consider yourself the guest of Brightwell Park for as long as you choose to remain at the King's Head, on whatever terms suit your dignity. I will not present myself unless invited. Brightwell." I rode home that night through a wind that was beginning to come round from the east, and I did not sleep particularly well, because I did not yet know whether I had done a thing well or a thing badly. By the 4th morning, the answer was waiting on John's bar. He told me the rest afterwards, and Esme has told me the rest since, so I have it from both sides. She had come down to the parlor at 7, dressed in her grey pelisse, with the leather case in her hand and her bonnet ribbons tied, prepared to walk. John had asked her to sit, and had set in front of her a pot of tea and a covered dish of buttered eggs and a slice of ham, and had laid the envelope on the cloth beside her plate. She had read the innkeeper's note, set down her teacup, and asked for paper and ink. She did not, John said, weep. She read my 3 lines twice. She opened the small fold of paper and looked at the thimble and the brooch lying on the cloth. She closed her hand around the brooch not tightly just once and laid it back down on the paper. She asked John whether what the note said was true, that the inn was now the Duke's and that he would not call on her unless she invited him. John said it was true. He had countersigned the memorandum in his own hand the night before. She asked for paper and ink. John brought them. She wrote, sitting at the parlor table by the fire for perhaps a quarter of an hour. When she had done, she folded the sheet and addressed it in a clear plain hand to His Grace the Duke of Brightwell, Brightwell Park *, and she gave it to John to send up to me by the stable-boy, with her compliments. The stable-boy reached the park at 9:30. I was in the breakfast-room. I broke the seal at the table. The letter said this. I will not give you the whole of it, some of it is hers. But the heart of it was that she thanked me, with a steadiness I have not since been able to read without quiet admiration, for the kindness of the gesture and for its restraint. She wrote that she could not, in conscience, accept the use of a roof bought for her without herself contributing some labor to the household that sheltered her. She had observed, she said, that John Reeve had no woman in the inn to keep the linen and the still-room. She proposed to remain at the King's Head at my pleasure, and to make herself useful to Mr. Reeve in those tasks, in exchange for her board, until such time as her cousin at Thirsk could be properly written to and arrangements properly made for her removal north. She would, on those terms only, consent to remain. She thanked me again for the return of her aunt's brooch, which she would wear at her collar, and of her mother's thimble, which she would put back in her case. She remained, with her gratitude and her respect, my obedient servant, Esme Hollister. I read the letter twice. I wrote back also briefly that her terms were accepted in full, that John Reeve would, I had no doubt, be grateful for her help, that I would not call until I was sent for, and that there was a vacancy at my own household for a paid attendant to my elderly Aunt Lady Sophia Brightwell, who lived with me at the park, which she might wish to consider when she had taken her measure of how matters stood. She might write me her answer at her leisure. I sent that back by the stable-boy with my own seal on it. She wrote her cousin at Thirsk the next morning. The cousin's reply, when it came a week later, was warm but realistic. The Thirsk house was small, the cousin's husband not robust, and a place secured for Esme at Brightwell at a fair wage would, the cousin wrote, be a providence she should not refuse. Esme stayed at the King's Head a fortnight more, helping John with the linen press and the still-room and writing 2 letters a day for him to brewers and chandlers, for his eyes were beginning to fail and he had been managing his correspondence by guesswork. At the end of the fortnight she walked, on her own initiative and in good weather, the 6 miles up the road to Brightwell Park, with John's stable-boy carrying her case behind her, and presented herself at the servants' entrance to my housekeeper, Mrs. Calder, as had been arranged. She was paid attendant to my Aunt Sophia from the 17th of October until the following March. I did not see her in that time more than perhaps 5 times, and never alone. Aunt Sophia, who was 78 and shrewd, wrote me a note on Christmas Eve in her thin slanting hand. Aubrey, she had always called me Aubrey, the young woman you have put in my room reads Cowper aloud as if she has known him her whole life, and has more sense than any of the 3 you sent me before her. I do not propose to lose her in March. Do something about it. I waited until a fortnight after the New Year and I wrote formally, asking Miss Hollister's permission to call upon her at the park on a Sunday afternoon for the purpose of an ordinary conversation. She granted it. We sat for an hour in the small library with Aunt Sophia in the next room with the door ajar, and we talked of Cowper, as it happened, and of Lincolnshire and of her Aunt Charlotte and of John Reeve's eyes, and at the end of the hour I asked her permission to write to her at the park during the week. She granted that too. We wrote one another 2 letters a week, from the middle of January through Lent. I called on her once in February and once in March. In April she allowed me to walk with her in the south garden when the snowdrops were nearly done, and to give her my arm. In May I asked her in the small library again on a Sunday, whether she would consent in due course to be my wife, and she answered me, having read the question very carefully through twice, in her own quiet way, that she would. We were married in the village church at Loughside in late June. John Reeve gave her away. He wept once during the service very quietly and afterwards apologized for it. Esme wore the small gold mourning brooch at her collar with her wedding gown. I had asked her to. The inn is John's still, he manages it, The annuity comes from my bank by the quarter, and the roof was done that first winter, and Esme rides down with me on a Thursday evening sometimes for an hour. The silver thimble lives in her work basket. The small gold mourning brooch lives in the lacquered box on her writing table, and she pins it to her collar on Sundays. I have thought sometimes in the years since, how easily I might not have stopped at the King's Head that particular Thursday, how easily I might have sat on the wrong side of the screen or come in 5 minutes later or not have come at all. I do not believe in Providence the way Aunt Sophia does, but I believe that a man may pay £500 in October and find that by the following June he has bought, without knowing it, the whole of the rest of his life.